Hi everyone. Today the idea is to see how we can really memorize names. They don't mean anything most of the time and you need a cue or making an association to remember people's name. I'm sure you've been in situations where you would be outside and you meet somebody and you can't remember their names, and that's extremely uncomfortable. So you're shaking their hands and they can see that you don't remember their names and you know that you don't. We should try to minimize those amount of situations, but they will always occur. It's impossible to remember every people's name. During this video, I want to try to share some of the methods I've learned using memory techniques. Most of the time, a name is a series of characters or letters, and it doesn't mean anything. So we need to create associations to remember them. A name is usually the opposite of a very explicit word, let's say like table or sun. Those words, they really mean something to us. So maybe you've traveled yourself and you found that in the first weeks, it's very hard to memorize people's names because you aren't used to them, and it's very hard for you to make any association. So from when I first arrived in Myanmar, I think it took me about 2 to 3 months to get kind of used to names and knowing whether, oh, this name is for a female, this name is for a male, and just memorizing them was not a piece of cake. So first of all, let's take an easy name, Mike, English name, and you want to associate the name with the picture that you're seeing right now. And how do you do this if you've just met this person, you don't know what are their interests? It's very hard to make any association. So one of the techniques is to see on their face if there's any particular character that you can notice. And in this instance, Mike has a pretty big beard. The second part is to associate the sounding of the name with a meaning. So Mike, for me, I would think about a microphone. And now how do you associate those things together? Well, you could imagine Mike and he's using a microphone, but instead of putting the microphone to his mouth, he's going to put the microphone in his beard as he's speaking, which is pretty awkward but very easy to memorize. The third thing is to associate a location with Mike. So what I would do is, instead of seeing Mike with, in my mind, with a white background, I would imagine Mike exactly where I met him the first time. So I imagine him where I met him the first time, which was in a hotel, and he has a microphone and he's putting it to his beard and speaking weirdly to a group of people. So let's say you've been to a meeting for work, or you've been to school if you're a student and you've encountered new people. Well, one of the good ways of memorizing their names is just before bed or during the day, just try to revise people's names that you've met. So you imagine this person and you're like, oh, what was their name again? Oh yeah, it was this one. Now let's move on to another name. So Arthur, and you can see his picture here. So Arthur, I've noticed, has nice blue eyes. So I'm going to use this as a cue. The sounding, as I said before, reminds me of King Arthur. So I'm basically going to picture Arthur with a sword, which reminds me of King Arthur. And the sword, instead of being grey, would be the same color as his eyes. So it would be a blue sword, which is kind of weird, but also easy to remember. Now imagine you go in a business meeting and you meet a Chinese person called Fen Fang, and you really want to make the point of memorizing her name for future. That will be helpful. What I would do in this case is I would split the name into and try to see, according to the sounding, what it reminds me of. In this particular instance, when I look at her face, I don't see any particular characters that I can create a good image with. So I'm just gonna build something from scratch. So Fin will remind me of something that is thin, so the opposite of fat. And Fang, I would imagine like a snake, a long tooth that would be coming on the side of her mouth and it's dripping with blood. Now imagine yourself going to a birthday and half of the people, you've never met them, you don't know their name at the beginning. But as you leave the party, then you're saying goodbye to everyone and you pronounce their name back as you say goodbye. So goodbye Arthur, goodbye Mike, goodbye Fin Fang. And so how do you think those people will feel? They will probably feel that they matter to you. Like you've started already to build a first relationship just by memorizing their names. If you're in a practice, you can of course apply this in real life and try to memorize people's name, but you can also use a website and do everything from home. The website I usually use is called Memorising. it does come with a price, so it's about $10 for a free month or $25 for a year. You can play for free, but you're limited to only 3 games per day. And it's a really nice way of just practicing how you can memorize names. So let's go in this website together. So our first name is Bernadette. That's actually close from the name of one of my neighbors. So I'm going to imagine her in her garden. And here's Cynthia. Cynthia happens to be a friend of mine who lives in Australia, so I'm going to picture her surfing. So that's an interesting face. This one I split the name and I remember car, so she's kind of getting into a car. Warren reminds me of war, so with his big eyebrows I imagine him with a rifle and going to war. Sharon, chat actually means in French cat, so I'll picture her with a cat. And Lydia, I imagine her with a lid, so she's kind of cooking. And now we have to find the people that we've actually memorized, so there we go. That's quite easy to remember with her nice hat. So that was Colin. And then, do you remember this one? Was with a cat, so that's the trigger chat in French, Sharon. And then this lady who was close from the name of my neighbor, Bernadette, and he is going to war, so that was the trigger, Warren. This is the name of my friend from Australia, she's surfing, Cynthia. And last one, she is holding a lid, Lydia. So yeah, there we go. They were all spelled the right way, so that's good for us, and we make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points with this. So of course you can try it yourself and you can push it much further. The more you try to memorize, the less time you have to create associations, but you'll see it's just a question of practice, and you can totally apply this in your daily life. It's exactly the same. Currently the world record to memorizing as many names as possible is more than 180 names. So people basically have 15 minutes and a sheet of paper with people's name and last name, and then they have 30 minutes to write down and associate with all those images. After all, the idea is just to make as many connections as you can between a person, their face, and their name.